Hello, everyone. We are back with part three, this time looking at the National League East. We had quite a few good teams in this league this year, so it's definitely going to be interesting looking at a few of them, notably the Cincinnati Reds, who had an outstanding season. But this is me as usual, Jonathan. I'm the Mariners GM, and today I'm with.
Hello, this is Joseph. I'm the co-commissioner of PBC and the current GM of the Monterey Sultanes.
Right. Um, so I think we would be foolish to start anywhere else except the Reds. What did you make of their season, Joseph?
I would have to say that was a remarkable season for them, even though it ended in heartbreak. Um, it was most one of the most fantastic displays of baseball we've seen in PBC for a while. This Reds team definitely ranks as one of the best teams in PBC history, up there with those insane '30s Brewers and the Pirates teams.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the postseason collapse, of course, we will talk about that. It was shocking. To win 114 games and then not win a single postseason series is, I mean, it has to go down as a bit of a failure. But I don't think that should overshadow the size of the accomplishment that they made during the regular season.
Right.
I mean, Ryan won GM of the Year and deservedly so for it. Um, it's very impressive the way he was able to put together some cheaper, lower cost, sort of lower ticket items, and but also ensure that he had stars across his lineup where it mattered, and just that consistency across the lineup to eliminate any holes, and resultingly every day, every game they played, they were on it and competing for the win, and in many cases
Absolutely.
took it. I
Yes,
think,
they were. I'm sorry, I was just going to say that. Yes, they were remarkable in their achievements with a small market team. The Cincinnati Reds actually rank 10th with the lowest payroll in baseball.
yeah, it just goes to show what you can do with a small budget. And I think a big part of what they're able to achieve this season was the holes they're able to fill with their preseason trade. I know you've got some notes on that one, haven't you?
Yes, we spoke about it a little earlier in episode 2, I believe. Uh, that's when in the offseason, the Cincinnati Reds traded starting pitcher Josh Croft to the Minnesota Twins for their center fielder Roddy Ben Aid and a first round draft pick that became Alfredo Serrano. And
Yeah, that's,
it turned
yeah,
out to be a beneficial trade for both clubs.
yeah, I'd agree with that. I think when we look at this trade, it has to be looked at in the context of the two organizations. You've got the Reds, who at the time needed a centre fielder, needed one that could contribute with both bat and glove. You've got the Twins, who needed pitching. Anthony, the hallmark of Anthony's teams, as we mentioned in the last part, is shut down pitching, and he needed a guy like Josh Croft to make that happen. And indeed, he made it happen with the strikeouts, leading the league in that category. Um, But for the Reds, as we mentioned, a smaller market team with that 10th lowest payroll, uh, Josh Croft was coming into his final year of his contract. He's already making, what was it, 13 million?
Yes.
Um, and I mean, we've seen now that he's been given an extension by the Twins for 22 million, I think it is a year, for 4 years. And that's not something that the Reds were going to be feasibly able to do without making significant concessions across their roster. So I think while Josh Croft is certainly a loss for the Reds, he wasn't a piece that had as much value as you might initially think on their roster.
I would agree with that.
Um, I think in Radi Bin Ayad, they picked up a very strong piece for their year. Um, and while Alfredo Serrano hasn't been a great first round pick, He was obviously at the lower end and came with that real rush for pitches, starting pitching going very heavily in the first round of the 2043 PBC draft. But I would say that the fact that they've been able to get this return with, well, otherwise they were going to be losing, they were just going to be straight up losing Croft at the end of the year. Maybe they get a qualifying offer in, but even then, I'm not sure. And the fact they were going to lose him for almost nothing, and they got this return back, I think is an achievement for the Reds.
I agree. It was a pretty true market, true trade by the Ryan.
Yes, and worth noting that before this trade, Ayad hadn't played a single major league game. This was an unknown quantity. And I mean, even in A+ in 42, he didn't post as good stats. His stats weren't nearly as good as his stats in the majors in 2043. So I think a very shrewd pickup. And while fragile, maybe someone that Anthony underrated.
Yes.
The other thing worth noting in this trade is motivations Anthony had to move Bin Ayad with having Ron Erler coming up as a centre fielder. So I think while Anthony has clearly lost a very capable piece, this was maybe someone that was on his way out anyway and was a bit blocked in the twin system.
Yes, a firmer first round draft pick by the Twins in 2040. And obviously the Twins would draft Ron Erler in one of the early rounds of 2042, I believe.
Yes, that may be right. Let me have a look. Twins, Ron Erler. Ron Erler was, first round, 4th overall pick in 2042. The contact hitter for the Twins with a good glove and great speed.
Right.
Okay, so moving on from the trade, I think the Reds were set up with a promising team for the season. I think there were very few holes, and that showed. We look at their hitters. Well, obviously there were some standouts which we'll mention in a moment. Their starters just performed across the board. Every single one of them hit over 100 in terms of WRC plus and had a WAR above 3. And I think that made a massive difference because it meant that on each game day they were ready to compete and they weren't relying on one guy to perform every day.
Right, and that's how you win games is when you're able to distribute run production across your whole lineup.
That is one thing though that I wonder. Do you think that might have had an impact on their postseason? Other teams maybe with some real outstanding hitters and some less outstanding hitters. Maybe those outstanding hitters got hot at the right time, whereas the Reds never really had anyone with that X factor per se going into playoffs. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I would believe that's accurate, but they did have some outstanding outliers on that lineup.
Yes, they did. Saldana, who I think you could say is the pick of the hitters. 6.7 WAR at first base is incredibly impressive, considering the reduction you get there, and a 153 WRC plus. I'm going to have a look at his postseason stats, but it appears in postseason he only hit for 111 WRC plus in 18 plate appearances. Obviously, very small sample size, but I think him having his lack of outstanding production in the playoffs, clearly one of the things that contributed to their first round exit.
I would agree, and also I believe some of that that exit and shock was due to the underestimation of their opponent that we'll talk about later this episode.
Yes, I think Saldana, 41 home runs, but none in the playoffs. So it's just an aspect that was missing in the postseason. In terms of other hitters, have you got anyone particular?
Well, you had a great rookie campaign from Chris Bullock.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Excellent production. Um,
Yeah, he
and
finished second in the Rookie of the Year voting, and
yeah,
he made his first All-Star game appearance.
indeed. Starting as he means to go on, and I think for him, hitting above that 300 mark, good OBP, good slugging, 23 home runs is perfectly reasonable, more than he's hit in the minors, and 137 weighted runs created, 5.2 WAR. Can't go much wrong with that, especially considering not maybe what I would have expected from a guy with his profile.
Then another big standout, in my opinion, would be Gavin Kolb, who was a midseason pickup in 2041 in a trade, a very good trade for the Reds.
Mm-hmm.
They traded a couple prospects to the Mets. His production
Yeah,
really started to take off once he was playing with the Reds.
yeah, Yusung Hernandez, who we will talk about later, and who else was it? Phil Anderson. So I think Phil Anderson, now a free agent, but had a good year with the Mets. I think the Mets got a fair compensation for it, but even then, Kolb has been outstanding.
Right. 6.5 WAR in his first full season, 52 home runs, 46 home runs the next season, 4.8 WAR.
Yeah. And in that 2042 season, he led the league in terms of his isolated power. And I think, with that home run tool, that contact tool, and no real holes in his plate profile, even with the lack of speed, he's an outstanding hitter and really made a big difference as the only other lefty aside from Radi Binayad in that starting lineup.
And another thing about this lineup is it's relatively young, 25.3 average age.
Mm. I think that definitely has made a big difference. But while young, I think there's a lot of guys here that are uh, on the older side of young, 26, 27, 25. You haven't got that many guys at the real young areas. Although there are a few, you've got a couple of guys at 22, a couple of guys at 23. But definitely a lot of guys who are maybe on their second season or third season who've had that time to settle and were able to produce on a grand scale this year. The other thing I think that's very impressive about that is that this core is so young, despite the fact that the Reds have been competing since 2039. 98 wins in 39, 96 and 40, 94 and 41, and 101 last season. This team has only been getting better, and yet they still have an incredibly young lineup.
Right, and that's what makes this run so impressive, and what Ryan's been able to do in Cincinnati since he took over the Reds.
Yeah.
And
Becca, no?
I was going to say, in 2039, when the team won 98 games, was actually Ryan's first GM of the Year award.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and probably deserved considering, they'd come from, what was it, 80 wins the season before?
Right.
So it's a big, big upswing. Beckhard and Navas are the other guys that I think really had outstanding years with the bat. Both guys with very heavy seasons of production. Bekaj hitting 136, Navas 135, and both posting a WAR either just below or a bit above 4. So yeah, I think hitting wise, this was an outstanding team, and resultingly, even when the pitchers maybe didn't have a great day, they always had a chance to catch up.
Right.
But even then, all 5 starters performed. I think would be accurate to say. There was no weak link in that rotation.
They had trouble filling that 5th spot. It looks like they tried Mulkey, they tried Maya, they tried Miller. I don't know if they had openers and followers,
Yeah,
but
there's
they're
definitely less certainty on that 5th spot. But even then, Mulkey, he put 19 games in. Let's just check his injury history. No injuries for him. But yeah, Mulkey made it. Wasn't a horrible showing at all. You're looking at a guy who had 2.72 ERA and 3.75 FIP. So, I think he had a perfectly reasonable year there as a starter. Although, with only 59 innings pitched, I'm pretty sure he was an opener. So I think that may be where we're getting a little confused here.
but their top 4 starters obviously were excellent.
Yeah, you've got Carrillo. Um, he had 3.09 ERA, 3.87 FIP. Very strong season. Only 35 games. It's pretty much playing every game. Carthen at age 37, putting a really good final series for the Reds. He's since signed for the Montreal Expos, but 3.58 ERA, 4.31 FIP. Maybe forming his results above his performance, but the Reds won't mind now. He's gone and given them a great final year. But I think the most impressive of all was Luis Reina. With Reina, you're looking at a guy who's not only performed to a 2.71 ERA, but his FIP is at 2.85, which suggests that this was no fluke whatsoever.
And
5.6 WAR.
He was a Cy Young winner.
The Cy Young winner indeed. And that's all based off 3 elite pitches with that fastball, curveball, and changeup, all either 75 or 80, making up for his somewhat lapsadaisical movement and control. Indeed, his FIP was league leading. And also his Ks per 9 and hits per 9. So really, shutting out those batters with elite stuff.
Right. And he also came over in a trade from New York.
Yes. Yeah. Having a closer look, it would appear that Aguilar was that 5th starter that they gave a lot of games to, but following on from Mulkey and a couple of others, I would imagine. His year was okay, 4.0 ERA, 4.38, but that's perfectly reasonable from a back end guy, and actually above average for the league.
Yes, I do believe that the Reds ranked first in many offensive and pitching categories in 2043.
Yes. They had the highest, the lowest starter ERA in the league, with lowest earned run average. They had the lowest runs allowed, and they gave away the least bases on balls, which, as we've seen countless times, often kills a team. So really keeping their opponents in check there. So pitching wise, great, but hitting wise, yeah, they were first in the National League in pretty much everything except getting on base with base on balls, which they were second. And stolen bases and base running wasn't a massive part of their game. And they were pretty average in terms of the amount they struck out. But everything else, top of the league. Looking at their bullpen, it wasn't the focus of the team, but even then, Brand had a very impressive season with ERA, and Glester and Mulkey, very strong performers. So I think even when you're looking at that bullpen, a very strong side.
Right, and their bullpen did rank third in the National League in ERA.
Yeah, truly a outstanding side. Then monster-wise, just jumbling up my words. Fielding-wise, Luna, a monster. This guy had the zone rating of 3 at a position where it's very hard to acquire that zone rating. And his framing at 17.3, I think he was very unfortunate that Paul Pick still exists, because
Yes,
that was a very good season defensively, and I think it becomes even more impressive when you consider that he was offensively decent as well. 107 WRC plus isn't going to make any headlines, but with that defense, you're getting 4.7 WAR, and so he's getting up to, I think he was had the 4th highest WAR on his team in terms of the lineup.
yes, he is definitely one of the best catchers in the game. But as you mentioned, it's a shame that Paul Pick will exist. He has a 70 catcher ability, and he has a cannon for an arm.
Truly one of the elite defensive catchers in this league. Despite there were a few issues in the outfield with Ayad and Kolb, but relatively minor. And aside from that, the whole team was defensively solid. Bennett, another really, really good performance from him. And the team, made good use of that 5.9 zone rating. But other than that, it's the same across the entire team. No holes.
Right.
Mike, in terms of some other guys, Mike Chiuarte, in their farm, he had a good season, especially September. And I think we're looking at a guy here with elite power, a good eye, and potentially even someone that could make an appearance next year.
Well, absolutely. And what's even more interesting about him is that he was a 4th-round pick in 2042, and he's already he already made his debut in the majors.
He's already made his debut, right? And he, I think, made his big breakthrough in 2042 with his development. And yeah, so that is the September that I've mentioned from my notes. Very strong September starting. Obviously, very small sample size, but you have to have some sort of talent to be able to hit for that sort of mark. 151 WRC plus and 2 home runs in 15 games. You're not going to be a weak hitter and get those sort of stats just from luck.
Right.
Farm-wise, where would you say they're looking?
I would say that they look pretty decent. Like they look like they have some pieces that are gonna be able to come up and help them compete when some of these older or the more expensive players go, and maybe Ryan can turn around and do what he did with Josh Croft and get some other pieces to fill holes.
Do you think we could potentially be looking at a team like the Pirates, where this could become a dynasty?
I do believe that Ryan and the Reds have the capability to become a dynasty, but I don't foresee them winning seven or 8 world championships in the next 13 years.
True. I think that really is, a bar that's almost impossibly high to reach. But I think we certainly could be looking at maybe a lesser version of that. especially with the amount of playoffs they're going to be able to reach, and hopefully for Ryan's sake, they're able to do a bit better in the postseason going forward and get some rings.
Right. They do appear to have a center fielder that looks like he could be up in 2044 by the name of Chris Greff.
Chris Greff. Yeah, I think overall a very solid guy. You're looking at very reasonable centre field defensively, and there's no holes in that bat. Although maybe the concern here is, will he really be able to get an outstanding production from any one of those areas, or might he just be left a little bit average?
Right.
Obviously, that's maybe not so much of a concern considering his position.
I also want to point out that this is the third year in a row that the Reds have been knocked out of the division series.
Yeah, so maybe starting to acquire almost a bit of a reputation for joking. I think that might be something Ryan needs to look into. I don't think we've got time to or have prepared any stats on their playoff performances. I'm not a massive personal believer in playoff stats because you get such small sample sizes, and that can often, impact the stats in a way that makes it very hard to pull reliable data from. But once you start to see, consistently dropping out of playoffs, you have to start asking those questions.
Right.
Seton is another guy that I think we could be seeing sooner than later. This is a guy with good home run power, good eye, good contact, and is very good at third base. He's got a cannon for an arm, and has been really making his way up through that system. He's
Yes.
he finished the season in high A, but I think maybe a September call up, depending on how his performance goes.
And he was born not too far away from Cincinnati in Alliance, Ohio.
So a hometown hero.
Yeah, I mean, relatively. I think Alliance closer to Akron than it is Cincinnati, but
right. But yeah, he's already very popular. He's already popular locally, and maybe a future star for the Reds. In terms of
and a supplemental pick.
Yeah. So not even first rounder. In terms of the real headliners of their draft, according to OSA, Mitchell, and also Cheadle, we're looking at two highly rated pitching prospects. I think they're not an awful distance away. Mitchell certainly with already a 45 overall, and Cheadle with a 35 overall. I think with Cheadle, that fastball, sinker, and splitter, they will look very nice, but his velocity is only 97 to 99, and with only 40 control and 40 movement as it stands, that's going to be a tough prospect in the major leagues, I think. And looking at a bit more detail, he did have a very small cameo in the major leagues, but rather disappointing. Not a great performance, and he'll certainly be looking to do better next year. With Cheadle, I think he's a bit more interesting, a left-handed prospect, and I think there's potential for him to go to the pen and be an elite reliever if there are problems with his starting. Do you have any thoughts on those two?
No, I don't. I think they're both going to contribute in some capacity for the Reds down the stretch in the next couple seasons.
Yeah. I think summing up the Reds after 5 strong seasons, there's still still nothing to show for it in terms of trophy wear. and this one will hurt. I mean, it will hurt a lot. 114 wins, but to be dumped out in the first round of their playoffs, very difficult. But fortunately for them, and unfortunately for the league, their core is still under good control, and they'll get another shot next year.
Right. Right. But they're going to have a lot more competition next year, I believe.
Yes. There's certainly some other teams that are going to be pushing them harder this year. Santo Domingo, one for certain. And we'll likely be talking about, some of these additions that have been made to some of the teams in their division in a future episode. So look forward to that. So moving on to the Pirates, a dynasty team for this league. And what did you make of their season, Joseph?
It was about the same as last season. It's just that it didn't result in their ninth championship. Like
No.
they 98 wins, 64 losses. Um, they're kind of middling in the offense, but pretty good. They had a pretty good pitching staff.
Yeah, I think
And
that pitching core still remains very strong. I think we have to point out probably we'll have to point this out every year until they fail to do it. But 12 years of playoffs in a row, over an 18-year span, they've only missed playoffs once, and obviously within that, a whole host of titles. But I think maybe this season was one of the first where we've really begun to see some of those cracks begin to appear on the hitting core. I think maybe the years of competing might be beginning to take its toll.
right,
I think with that hitting core, if we move on to them now, Ichana, Ion, and McLaren were definitely the big pieces there. Great production, 55 home runs from Ichana. Great season from him. And I think when we look at that offensive core, these guys have been big parts of that Pirates team for a long time.
right,
Which is why I think it's going to be very difficult for them with two of those guys leaving.
right.
Yeah,
Ichanner is now a free agent, and so is Luis Ian.
indeed. Both guys, very prolific players. But I think when you look at, maybe they get back 2 compensation picks there. Ichana, though, is asking for a big salary, 30 million a year. The Pirates have been paying him only 20 million a year. So I think, don't know who's going to pick that up. He may actually drop to spring training, and we may see no compensation pick. With Ion, he's also asking for a lot in 28 million. We'll see whether or not anyone's willing to take that hit. But certainly, even with the draft compensation, losing such big pieces in your hitting core is going to be brutal for the Pirates. And especially considering that both players were on very team-friendly contracts or cost control at that time.
Right. And Ichanner, he's had a very great career in Pittsburgh. He's nearly hit 400 home runs there.
Is it possible to have your number retired after leaving in free agent for free agency? Because I think if there's ever a case for that, he would be one of them.
I don't think so, but I don't think he's a Hall of Famer.
Mm.
But yeah, I think he's worthy of getting his number retired by the Pirates.
And in terms of other guys that had really good seasons, we're looking at where are we at? We're looking at Silver and Rice. Very good, solid performances. And just in general, a very good team here.
Right.
We also have to mention, a couple of very good bench bats. Kazi and we were, both hitting above that 140 WRC plus mark, and in total, I think the hitting core was able to do its job this year. I think while the hitting core was good, though, the key to this team, as always, remains the pitching. We had 5 very clear starters on this team in Alayon, Carlson, Esparza, Pipapeni Cacerini, and Morford. And I think of those, aside from Morford, they were all outstanding.
Right.
Morford, I think, maybe a bit of a disappointing year, though. He's a number 5, and he's not being paid much. Only what was it? 3.4
3.4
million.
mil.
No, 3 million in 2043.
Oh.
But even then, you could have a guy on league minimum from AAA who's going to perform to about that standard. So I think they'll be disappointed with that.
Oh, this is Morford's first year as a starter.
Yeah. And I just question whether or not he's a starter. You look at his makeup, you've got, that's an elite cutter at 70 and a great changeup at 60. But with the only other offering being a 35 rated slider, I think this guy's more suited to the pen.
I would agree with that, and it definitely shows in his production in the past in the pen.
And I think potentially maybe a sort of a last minute stopgap for that rotation. Because in his minor career, he's been a reliever. He had 2 starts in AAA and 1 start in AAA the year before. But aside from that, he 27 games in 2042 as a reliever in the MLB, and 218 ERA plus that year. So I think definitely a guy that maybe his role should be reevaluated going into next year.
I agree.
From the pen, though, speaking of it, we have great performances from Botello, Miller, and Reeves. Which of those is your favourite?
I believe they all got reliever of the year votes.
Yeah.
I think not sure which one won. I think maybe Miller. No, Miller won last year.
It was. If you have a look at who won, and I'll talk a little bit about them.
Okay.
So with these guys, we're looking at 2 guys who had an ERA under 2. Their FIPS 2.29 and 2.17. These guys have almost borderline starter level WAR totals with 3.3 and 2.8. And this is most teams would be happy to have either one of them as their closer, and yet the Pirates have been lucky enough to have both. And Miller is, to think that he could have been even better with that third pitch, that change up with a 90 potential, never developing. This is I think, one of the best relievers in baseball. 110 potential stuff, and even then, current 90. I think it's obviously that what-if question of whether or not he could ever, what it would look like if he was ever able to reach that potential. But even then, his current state is truly terrifying. Have you been able to have a look at who won the Reliever
Yes.
of the Year?
Yes, it was Theodore Kelly, who we'll talk about later.
There we go. Yeah, so it turns out the only person that could beat this phenom was another one. And he's certainly a guy that I think we'll be hearing a lot about over the next decade in the league, if not more. Defensively, in the field, I think we're looking at a strong team. As mentioned, this team is still one that Anthony put together, and you won't find one of his teams with a poor defense. You're looking at Morales having a very strong season as catcher. Iguanas, Catarini doing good at first and second. I think the only concern you can see there was Rice with some poor defense in centre field, but I think maybe made up for that a bit with the bat.
Right.
Have you had a chance to look at their farm yet, Joseph?
I believe their farm is they have one standout player who could be taking Ichanner's place in the upcoming season, but he's got a torn labrum at the moment.
Yeah, I think when you look at their farm, it's looking pretty barren. You've got that one guy, Zuzef Sequim. He's a elite first base prospect, but he's got that torn labrum at the moment. He had that injury in late July. No, late June, my bad. And that ended his season, and it could potentially stretch into that spring training. This is also a guy that's not particularly adept at first base, and still needs that that extra development to make that home run power to really push him to that elite level. And I think Mike will be very disappointed for him to have missed out on such a crucial part of his development at a time where he was really banking on him being ready for 2044.
Right. And other than that, I believe they have a pretty nice outfielder in Josh Jafe, who doesn't look to be ready until for about 2 or 3 more seasons. Same with Josh Jones.
All the Joshes in Pittsburgh today. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
with both guys, you're looking at very young options. If I'm going to be frankly honest, I'd be very surprised if we see either of them ever don a Pirates uniform. I think
Yeah.
these guys are people that are going to be traded to paper over some of these cracks going into the next few years. And hopefully the Pirates can make a few last pushes before they finally have to take the plunge and acknowledge that this team has been competing for too long and needs a reset.
Right. And as good as the Pirates have been, they don't have the streak that New Orleans has.
No, and this is, I think, one of the interesting storylines we've seen in PBC is that while Anthony has been far more than successful GM when it comes to actually winning championships, the Voodoo have been on an even more consistent run of making playoffs. Almost the perennial bridesmaid, always there but never actually their wedding. And I think I don't know how many World Series Voodoo have actually made. I can have a look at
2.
that now.
They won
2.
both.
But certainly a lot of teams will be looking at the Pirates and will not be missing them in the playoff bracket.
Right.
So in total, not the result the Pirates wanted. Their window's beginning to close, and I think we'll just have to see just how much time the Pirates have left in the limelight after this year. So now we can move on. I think we have the Phillies coming up next. Oh, I think when we look at the Phillies season this year, it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, very exciting playoff push, making that World Series. I think they'll be chuffed to have found themselves all the way up there at the end of the year. But at the same time, very disappointing to end up losing that series against the Yankees, and also perhaps not quite such a good regular season as they would have hoped, especially considering their salaries are one of the most expensive in the league at this point.
Right.
It's also another season without a World Series. The drought has now reached 35 years, with not a single World Series in the human GM era, and that's not a number that the Phillies will like to see increase.
Yes, and the last time that the Phillies were in the World Series, they also lost to the New York Yankees. That was in 2019, the last time that the Yankees won the World Series.
Right. So perhaps a little bit of a rivalry there, and certainly a team that is really putting together a bit of a reputation as a team that is making these pushes, but not quite making it.
Well, I mean, the Phillies just kind of came out of nowhere when they first in 2040. They lost over 100 games in 2039. Then here they are in 2040, and they're 88 and 74, third place, and getting a wild card and going to the playoffs.
And then since then, it's only been up, except for
Yes.
this year. Last year, in 2042, we're looking at 104 wins. A great season. But this year, going back down to 93. Obviously, it doesn't help having Titans in your division like the Pirates and the Reds. But even then, you'd be looking for a slightly better season, perhaps, when you're really competing for that World Series. Certainly in the late 20s and early 30s, when they were in another run of competing, they had 3 seasons in a row with over 100 wins, and including the famous season in 2031 where they made 118 wins, and yet even then another season where there was no cigar with the World Series, in spite of that hitting core was absolutely brutal. Rob Stillman, Eddie Womble, just great names from the past who were really outstanding in that push. And then obviously they still struggle to make that work. Is there anything particularly you want to talk about with the hitters?
I do want to give a shout out to one of my favorite players on the team and somebody that I was really hyped up about in the World Series, and that's Chris Samples.
And what is it you like about him?
He's just had he's had a I don't know, he's just a serviceable guy. He's just somebody you can rely on. He's got 3 Silver Sluggers, no All-Star appearances, no rings, but 34 WAR over a 12-year career is pretty remarkable in this league.
Yeah, I mean the guy, he's
Especially for a shortstop that doesn't hit well.
he's never going to be that outstanding hitting player at the front of the plate, but at the same time, he's not a massive hole. This year 91 WRC plus, um, perfect guy to put near the bottom of that order, and yet defensively very strong. So a perfect role player on this team, and at 35, maybe reaching the tail end of his career, he'll certainly have been disappointed to miss out on that ring. His chances obviously getting slimmer and slimmer, but maybe next year. Other hitters that I was very impressed by: Jose Dawson, Bobby Kiefer, Joachim Vinette, and Amari Wildridge and Danny Schrader. All very good seasons. And I think the other thing the elephant in the room with their hitting core, Randy Okonek having that injury, was not what they were looking for. A torn back muscle in late May, and as a result, he missed a very large proportion of the season. I believe he may have actually missed the playoffs, although I'm not entirely sure. And for a guy that was such a key part of their lineup, it's very impressive that they were able to compete even without him.
Yeah, they're. Let's not forget Caterini.
Yeah, Caterini is another strong player.
But he's coming towards the end of his career.
Indeed, and thank goodness too. If you look at his achievements in his career, they are about to, start overtaking the screen. He's won several Gold Gloves, multiple All Stars appearances, multiple All Sluggers, multiple World Series, and multiple MVP performances in playoff series. And in fact, to start it all off, he won Rookie of the Year in 2031, and
Right.
the crowning achievement, aside from his team achievements with the World Series, must be that MVP in 2039.
Right.
Yeah,
I think.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, but his star is slowly rising, and he won that MVP at the end of his contract in a contract year with Pittsburgh before he signed that massive deal with Philadelphia. Yeah, he signed with a 7-year contract worth $384.8 million with Philadelphia in 2040.
Yeah, he's making 60 million a year, which is incredible. And while that will be decreasing going into 2045 and 2046, going down to 55 and then 49 million, he's still got another year of 60 coming up, and we're beginning to see signs of decline.
Right. Yeah, his defense has been going down for the last couple of years, but he's still one of the best fielding catchers in the league.
Yeah, indeed, that arm is starting to get a little bit more concerning. Certainly, guys, far more happy to run on him. In the World Series episode, we did talk a little bit about this, and while that framing is still very good, the 24 framing, um, the arm is beginning to get quite concerning. He's only thrown out 17.5 runners, if I find that correctly. Yep, that is correct. So yeah, some very strong hitters. I think while I mentioned their names, it's important not to gloss over them. We're looking at all of these guys who are hitting either over 120 WRC plus, many of them hitting over 130, and making big contributions on a daily basis. And certainly, as we were looking at the World Series before, we were really focusing on this team as an offensive monster, and they had to be to get through the Reds.
Right.
Pitching, it's okay. I don't think
That's not their strong point.
Yeah, it certainly is a weakness, I think, for this team. We saw that in the World Series. Uh, Malesio remains one of the best left-handed starters in baseball, and put in another, quality season with a 3.23 ERA and a FIP that pretty much matched, and giving up the least bases on balls in the league. So a very good season from him.
Yes, future Hall of Famer,
I
4-time
would agree.
Cy Young winner.
First ballot, in my opinion.
He's even won a Reliever of the Year award.
He's literally does it all.
Yes. Yeah, he started out as a reliever in Pittsburgh before making that jump as a starter in 2037.
Yeah, so another guy I'd like to mention is the not quite rookie, but in his second season, Jake Bennett, and it's certainly his first full season. He, flirted with relief appearances, but as a whole, he had a good first full season, and with his potential, potentially, a guy for the future for that team, although he's getting a bit old to fulfill on some of that.
Right. Yeah, he definitely bounced back from last season.
Yeah. Yeah,
In
he did not have a
2040,
great
42.
he did not have a great first season. And so this will certainly restore a little bit of confidence in this guy's ability to produce at the major league level. Going to the pen, relatively unspectacular. Some good seasons though. Roda, Guerra, you know, some high WPAs here. 1.7 on Guerra, and where is he? Roda also having a good season with a 1.32 ERA plus and an 87 FIP minus. So another very good performer. Although he is now spending some time on the injured list. He did get that injury back in July, and with that shoulder inflammation, he's going to be touch and go for the start of next season.
Another player
Then,
in their bullpen I'd like to point out is Joe Messner.
yeah, what do you like about him?
Well, he's definitely somebody you can rely on to throw a lot of innings in relief.
Yeah, that 65 stamina, very important.
And it looks like, he had 23 shutdowns and 12 meltdowns over the year, but he's definitely somebody that you know, maybe his full potential hasn't been reached yet.
Certainly not. This is a guy who was drafted as, a starting pitcher. He was drafted in the second round by the Phillies. But this is a guy who at one point was rated to have 70 potential by OSA. This is a guy I suspect, I can't say for certain, but I suspect those last two pitches of the screwball and change-up may once have contributed a little bit more and could have potentially even put him on the starter's mound. But certainly doing a good job in relief, even if it's not potentially what was once promised. Defensively, they were a strong team. I think you have to be to reach the World Series. And the bright spots here were really Asbury at third, Samples, as we've spoke about, at shortstop, and Kiefer at right field. Lastly, at Dawson at centre field. If we take a look at their farm, give us one moment.
Well, they definitely have two standout prospects in their system that still look to be about a year or two away.
Yeah. Tanguma is an outstanding catcher. We're looking at a guy who maybe defensively not so good, but certainly has that offensive profile to make up for that. And he's certainly 24 now. He's getting on his way to needing to be able to show what he has at the major league level. And otherwise, I think there might be a few concerns about whether he can ever reach that potential.
Right. Then you also have Danny Millville, who's
Yeah,
22, an
this is
eighth
a guy
round
that's
pick.
really, yeah, he's really developed over this season. We
Then I
saw
got a
that.
couple third basemen who are a bit ways away. But yeah, they got a decent farm. I think they're ranked 15th in the league.
Yeah, I mean it's decent considering all things considered. Um, Going back to Danny Melville, yes, I've just confirmed he started this breakthrough back in late 2042. Was originally drafted with a 35 potential, and yet now he's at 80 potential, and that power and eye is going to really propel him to success. Although he will have to make progress, his power still needs to get a bit better. Although his eye is already elite, and he will need to work on his contact skills.
Right.
And the only concern here, of course, is the Phillies do not have much that they can spend on their development budget. They are horrifically over budget. If I pull up the financial stats of the league. Yeah, so financially, we're looking at a team that's 65 million over their budget. Their ticket price is at $37 per game, and yet they still have nowhere near enough to cover their expenses, and will very much be struggling to make that work going forward. Their payroll is at 246 million.
That is the highest in PBC.
It is. It's in fact almost 50 million higher than the second highest team in the Giants. So we're looking at Cohen level spending here, and almost double some teams in the league.
In 2043, they were only fifth in the league in payroll with 208 million in. How much over budget they were? Looks like about 7 million over budget because their total revenue was 201 million.
Yeah, they've spent over 100 million more than the Cincinnati Reds this year. Although it is worth noting of this caveat, this budget space is referring to the financial situation in the off-season heading into 2044, so it may not be entirely reflective of their financial state in 2043. Although that budget for the dev will have been really minimized even at that stage, only spending 4.5 million on their dev budget. I think if we're looking more at financial state, I think we did mention a little bit on episode 1.
Yes.
I think in total, disappointed not to win it all. They had a good year, but I think they're still in a good position to try and replicate their season this year. But I think they are certainly going to be running against the clock with that budget, and with their inability to replace anybody that has to go. Anything else to add?
No. It's just they had an incredible run. The 2043 World Series was one of the most exciting World Series in PBC I've seen. Most of them went into extra innings, one by one game, or one by one run, one or two runs. And yeah, it was an exciting season, and I'd like to see what Jackson's able to do moving forward with this team.
Sure. So, moving to the New York Mets. I think this is the team with one of the biggest budgets in the entire league. But maybe a season. What did you make of their season?
Well, it definitely was an improvement over the last couple seasons. Their payroll was starting to go down, and they're starting to turn a profit. And they won 8 more games than they did in 2042.
Right. So, I think for me, when I'm looking at the New York Mets, is LOL Mets is eternal. It's another year where they haven't really achieved anything. They weren't horrible, but there's not much more going on there. And I'm unsure about where this team can go future-wise.
I believe they're if they want to compete, they're probably going to have to be really shrewd in their negotiations with other teams in the free market, in the free agent market.
Yes, I think for sure this is a team that's going to have to buy their way to success. But there are still some good pieces at the moment. Yusong Hernandez is a very competent plus contact guy. 139 WRC plus. very good season. Defensively, perfectly reasonable in the corner outfield, and he's not too slow either. So I think this is a strong hitter that they can build around, especially with him being young. Although his arbitration is going to be pending after the next year. The other guy that I think is a good strong point this year was Nelson. Nelson had a strong year, and I think really carried that offense for the Mets. What did you think?
I think this was something we haven't seen from Nelson in years.
I think
Like he's been
155 WRC plus is so different to that 113 he's done 2 years in a row before at St. Louis and Anaheim.
right.
And I mean, what a season to do it in. Heading to free agency. I think he's really been able to bump up that free agent ask. And it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see where he goes going forward.
He only signed a 1-year contract worth $9.3 million with the New York Mets after signing a 1-year contract worth $14.6 with Anaheim the year before. And for some strange reason, New York did not play him full time.
Indeed, and I think there's definitely when we talk about Mets, we have to consider the fact that there was uncertainty over the GM this year. We had Sean that came in, but for a lot of the season there was AI control of this team, and I think that has to be considered when we look at some of the more questionable moves for this lineup.
Right.
I think Medina was good, made an impact at DH. Another guy that I was impressed by was Anderson. Limited season because of injury, but otherwise very good.
He seems to be overvalued by OSA, in my opinion.
Quite potentially.
Especially with not even putting up that much production.
Yeah, for sure. I think the AI can sometimes overvalue guys that have decent production and great fielding. But we'll see. I think certainly one for the future, and but a good year. Debut-wise, Casey Lera at catcher, I think he was a bright spot. He sets them well up for the future. It's always important to have guys at some of these key positions on these cost-controlled salaries. This is a former 8th round pick from 2040, and he had a very good year. Started the year in high A, and then quickly 23 games at high A, 23 games at double A, 39 games at triple A, and then finishing the year with 41 games in the MLB with a 155 WRC plus. I think this is a very promising spot for this team.
I would have to agree. One of the bright spots of the team moving forward.
Yes. Rest of the lineup wise, I think just generally average or worse. Nothing special, and a few guys that really shouldn't be on a major league roster. But I think there were bigger issues on this team.
Their pitching.
Yeah, I mean it was decent. Dave Wright and Meza, strong seasons, and Chamberlain, he was a decent innings eater. But the lack of any real 4 or 5 was a big issue. You can't go into 40% of your games with no real guy to call on.
Well, they did trade one of their players mid-season.
Would you like to talk about that trade?
Yes. So one of the Dodgers were making a push to try to make the postseason, as the NL wild card was a pretty tight race most of the year. But those are all teams in the NL West.
You had the Dodgers San Francisco rivalry, really going down to the wire, didn't you?
Yes, you did. And the Dodgers traded a pretty good haul to get Juan Romero, and they traded a 2044 4th round pick. They traded some prospects in Ken Mook, Mike Stickney, Esteban Medina, Kevin Lacey to the Mets, and they took on Ron Rivera's contract. So that long-term contract, the Mets moved off their books, and now they got more, more money.
Yeah, and I think having that flexibility when you're having to look at wholesale changes to your roster in the coming off season is big for the Mets.
And Romero ended up playing very well for the Dodgers, and we'll talk about that more next episode.
Indeed.
And
Were there any other trades that you want to talk about with the Mets? I know I think there was a mid-season trade, wasn't there, that we talked about briefly with Nash.
right, the Mets traded their relief pitchers Chris Nash and Juan Escobedo to the Vancouver Grizzlies for Bobby Nesbitt and Josh Stoneburner. And it turned out to be a very good trade for Vancouver, as we were talking about before. Chris Nash was nasty in his games with Vancouver.
Sure. And I mean, he'd already been great with the Mets, but he really took it up a new level with Vancouver.
Oh,
And I think
absolutely.
certainly was a miss from the pen. One guy I'd like to mention for a debut was Manas. I think it was an unimpressive debut, but there's definitely potential for more. This is a guy that they're certainly going to be looking for the future. And with that starting pitching prospect as 80 potential, and already having developed a lot of that stuff, really just looking at that movement and turning that slider into a truly elite 85 pitch. We're looking at a strong future in the pitching with him. Defensively, we've got McKenzie, not great at centre field, but then to contrast that, you've got Hunter, who was excellent at shortstop, and Patella was good at third. And I think so. Generally, we get a good, decent defense, which is rare on some of these more middling teams.
Right.
I think when we look at the farm, there's a decent amount of talent. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And currently, they have the 14th best farm system in baseball.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's no real standout guy here.
I believe there is Sid Finch.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Sid Finch is a standout on the pitching side, if for the fact that he's an elite knuckleballer on its own. So this is an English phenomenon who has really made good strides this year since signing. He is, of course, the creator prospect from last year's Pirates. Mike created him. And if you want to look up, there's some great stories about the real life Sid Finch story and some good YouTube videos. It's definitely worth having a look into. And obviously was some of the inspiration for this guy. But
Right.
he's had a good year. He'll still need to develop further, but
But I believe his
moving on.
ceiling is high, especially for a league that is low on pitching prospects.
Yeah, for sure. Snead, I think, is another strong prospect. This guy's
Yes.
got an elite eye, and I was very happy to see the progress he's made this season. I think he's probably on the brink of the active roster at this point.
And I would say that you could probably see Jared Cameron up there as well, and Brad McFadden.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, they got quite a nice young core that could be coming up here soon in the outfield.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a good future for this team. And considering the size of this team's budget, I think they'll be definitely expected to be doing far more going forward.
Right.
So next, we have another team that struggled a bit with the AI, in the Atlanta Braves. Yeah, so I think with the Braves, we're looking at a similar season to the Mets. both teams, having AI for a decent proportion. I think the AI actually controlled the Braves for the entire season, and a season of mediocrity. Never seemed good enough to compete, but never quite bad enough to really suffer. Some bright spots, but just a lack of any elite talent makes them quite a boring watch.
Yeah, this is a team that has struggled to make the postseason, despite having some pretty decent teams. They would always like conquer out or like just in the last couple weeks just fall apart. They only made the playoffs once in the last 10 years, and that was in they made the playoffs after game 163.
Yeah, so just in general, a team that seems to be maybe lacking a bit of direction. Which is why obviously it's great to see a new GM come in to take them over.
Right.
We had the recent takeover by John, and we'll look forward to seeing what direction he takes them in, because there's certainly some bright spots. The first bright spot I'd really like to look at is their young star in Appleton. This guy came in mid-season, started the year in AAA, was mashing in AAA, and then came up to the big leagues and hit 143 WRC plus wise, and also with a 4.6 WAR season. What did you make of his rookie year? No, actually, rookie. He had some time in 2042 where he
Right.
struggled. So his first real push at the big leagues.
Yes, he was. Yeah, he had a very good rookie campaign, but it's or no, not rookie campaign, but a second year, sophomore year. Like he definitely improved upon his poor showing in his first 50 games in 42.
Yeah, coming back up, it was definitely an improved performance. From a guy who spent quite a lot of time just sort of on the brink of the major league team. He's now 26 and still under good control. A former trade from the Yankees. 2042, they picked him up along with a couple of other guys, Nosco, Carballo, and a fourth-round pick in exchange for Menzel, who is now a free agent, but was on the Yankees for that 1 year, so a rental.
Right.
So I think the Braves will be quite happy with getting that back for a rental.
I believe so. I think Appleton is one of the shining stars of the NL East at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And I think the only other guy really on this hitting lineup that could really come close in his performance was Coulter, Joe Coulter at first base. And this is 121 WRC plus, 1.9 WAR. He wasn't spectacular, but on this Braves team, he was one of the best hitters.
Right. I do think that Juan Delgado did have a little bit of an off season, and that he should be able to get back to his normal levels in 44.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. This is a guy with elite home run power, a good second base performer. The only problem he has is quite a weak infield arm. Also worth noting, his poor work ethic maybe had something to do with a poor season. I think another thing that is very sorry about that. Another thing worth noting is they had a lot of players that played for them this year. I think they had one of the largest amount of different players who played on their team this year, and normally you'd hope maybe they were finding strength and depth, but in this case, no, it was just trying to find anybody that would do the job. But everyone was pretty weak offensively. You had weak performances from Hansford, Carvalho, Hill, and Pacheco is another guy I'd like to really mention who really disappointed this year.
Well, Pacheco is 39 years old.
He is.
He spent his whole career with Atlanta. Borderline Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
This was definitely the worst year of his career, and I believe he did he retire?
No, he is a free
No.
agent for this year. So the Wasp has made many All-Star seasons. 39 still wants another crack at it, but it's certainly worrying to see go from 2041 124 WRC plus, 2042 86, 2043 52. A real decline there.
Not to mention his WAR negative 1.7.
Inverting his WAR from the year before.
Right.
On the pitching wise, Joe Hedgie or Hedgill and Aguilar had good seasons.
Yes, they did, and all are pretty old as well. I mean, this is a team that's going to have to find some younger talent if they want to compete in the coming years.
Indeed.
I believe.
And I think it's not just the rotation that has problems. Their bullpen was just generally pretty poor.
Yes, it is.
There are very few real good pieces there. I think Drumgold, definitely a little bit of light there, but other than that, it's not looking great. Another thing
He
that's
also
quite
had Rolak. Rolak had a decent season in the bullpen, but I think Drumgold is probably the one with the better future.
Yeah, for sure. Then, looking in the pen, Price and Trujillo, or Trujillo, how do you pronounce that surname?
Trujillo?
Trujillo, yeah, they both had decent seasons. But I think Trujillo's career is likely over. He had a pretty nasty case of shoulder inflammation, and the regression since has been quite sad to see. Have you been able to find him?
Trujillo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be a free agent.
Yes, he is. Yeah, he has really regressed in the last couple seasons.
Yeah.
But he never fully reached his potential as a starter.
No. No, this is a guy that was once considered to be a top prospect at starter with 70 potential. Went down to 60, went down to 50, and he only ever really hit a 45 overall at one point. And now that that regression really starting to take hold, even at 29, and I think that has something to do with the injury.
But he did win four rings with the Pirates. What's strange is that once he signed his contract with Atlanta, he ended up becoming a starter. Yeah, he only started 25 games for Pittsburgh out of 298 in his career.
Yeah. Now, defensively, there were holes. The corner of the outfields, Appleton and Pacheco. But Tim Hill hoovered it all up in the centre. This guy had a Gold Glove season, 16 zone rating, which is truly outstanding. And then, of course, you had Delgado strong at second base. Looking over at their farm system, it's not bad, but it's pretty disappointing considering the state that their major league roster is in. Jorge Lara is their number one prospect, but he's struggling to develop, and I think he still hasn't really been able to make an impact at junior rookie, despite now being 19.
Yeah, they rank pretty low on the the farm system rankings. They're 26th in the league.
Yeah. Eric Parker is another left-hand pitcher prospect they have there. He's made some progress, but still quite a long way off, and he'll need to develop that change-up to stay out of the pen. Anyone else you want to mention on that farm?
You could be seeing Kevin Hammond in the Braves uniform in 2044.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah,
he's got
Kevin.
elite defense at shortstop.
And at only 21, he still has room to grow.
Right. Yeah, I would say that's about the only person I'm really looking at. Well, Drum Gold.
Yeah, Drumgold, of course. I think their farm system grossly underrates him.
I think it's about. I don't think they have some. I don't think they have that many great pieces. They're mostly just average MLB players.
For sure.
Once they reach their potential, they just seem average.
And I think that puts them in a very difficult position as an org, because they're going to struggle to be contenders out of the current pieces, but they'll still have that ability to play 500 ball. But so we'll just have to see. We'll see what John decides to take, which direction he takes them in. But it's going to be an interesting future.
Right.
All right, so now we're going to move on to the next team, which is the Charlotte Bobcats. So the expansion team Bobcats, they're still they haven't made quite such a hot start as the Grizzlies did to their life in the PBC, but another interesting season for them. What did you make of it, Joseph?
It's definitely something that they were able to build upon last season. It's still a pretty big disappointment from their 2039 season when they almost made their first playoff, but lost in the game 163 to the Colorado Rockies.
And I think one thing to note about this team is it has a very clear identity. They are a pitching team. You know, offensively, this team has no right to be anywhere but the basement. But I think they've got an elite closer, strong pitching staff, and that provides a future for them.
They also have a very good defense.
This is true. They may not be able to hit at the plate, but they can play with the glove.
Right.
I think we are maligning their offense, so we should at least point out their one real offensive highlight, which was Ron Henry. He had a great season with the bat, but I think going forward, not really something to consider. He is headed to free agency, and while I think he does have a qualifying offer attached, I will check that now. We are still looking at a guy that, yes, he does have a qualifying offer, so they will be getting some compensation there if he's signed before spring training. But he's going to leave a big hole in that Charlotte lineup.
Right. They did get some production out of Bubba DeClue and Chris Braun.
But I think you need far more standout pieces there when you have, some performances like Carriaga, Villarreal. I mean, they were truly awful at the plate.
Right.
I think moving on to the pitching, best not to dwell on that hitting lineup. Hanu Harpavi, or Harpayavi, put together a real outstanding season. I think he was very much deserved that big new contract he was given, and
Right.
I think a real, piece for the future there.
Right. He signed a 10-year contract worth $227.2 million in December of 2043 after the season.
Yeah, so he has made it absolute bank, and we'll just have to hope that he doesn't sit on that and he continues to perform going forward. I think in terms of the other pitchers, Cuevas and Baker were very good. Cuevas had a thoroughly impressive rookie campaign, in my opinion.
Yes, he still
And
has some room to grow.
yeah, I think if he's not even done yet and he can improve on that performance, we could be looking at a very scary pitching team going forward.
Right, he has 100 stuff potential. He's only at 75 right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from, looking to push that changeup, which is already at 85 to 95, making it a truly elite pitch. His curveball could also, can go up 15 points to 85, and then even then his knuckle and fastball can be pushed, 5 and then 10 and then 5 points respectively to round out that stuff. So I think we're looking at a guy that, while he will have movement issues, good luck trying to hit it in the first place, even if you know where it's going.
Right, but we all know who the best pitcher on that staff is.
Indeed, the best pitcher on that staff is not in the rotation whatsoever. It is their, star young closer, Theodore Kelly. Do you want to talk a little bit about him?
He is a creative prospect from Patrick's first World Series win with the New Orleans Voodoo. And this guy came into the league at 16 years old. He's got 110 stuff, 75 movement, 65 control, a 90 slider, and an 80 sinker. And he just finally won his first Reliever of the Year award.
Yeah, I think there'll be many more to come with that profile.
Right,
While it
he's
is
only
only
20.
yeah, he's 21, and it's only a two-pitch mix, but elite movement, great control, and both of those pitches are, the sinker slider combo is absolutely disgusting. This year he was looking at 270 ERA plus and 43 FIP minus, and while he's not leading the league in anything yet, I think he's going to be a key piece for years to come. I think he signed a. Did he sign? Yeah, he signed a big new contract. He's
10
also on
years,
a 10.
193 million.
Yeah, he's getting what a lot of starters will be getting, and even then, this deal is going to ramp up. It's starting at 16 million, and many of the years will only be at 18. So we're looking at a very good player. And the shocking thing is, even at the end of this 10-year contract, he'll only be 30, and so will likely still have time for more. This guy could quite potentially be one of the highest earning relievers in the history of the PCB. Another thing to note with him, he did actually get some Cy Young votes. It will be very interesting to see whether he's ever able to acquire that. But if there was ever a year where there's poor starting pitching going for that award, he'll certainly be there.
I believe Malicio. No, who was it? There was
I think it was
reliever
Yeah, I think it
who
was Malicio
won.
who won the Cy Young as a reliever. Yeah, so maybe can pay a homage to him and also win the Cy Young as a reliever.
Well, I mean, what's insane is that as a closer, as a relief pitcher, he had 4.1 WAR.
Yeah, it's while normally an elite closer in your team is an important piece, Kelly goes beyond that, I think, and is a core piece of this team.
I think he's a big part of this team's identity.
Yes. With him in the pen, Collins and Belliard were great. I think it's important that that you have guys to set him up. He does have 40 stamina, but you still don't want him going for multiple innings every game.
Right. I can tell you how many blown saves he had all of last year.
Oh, yeah?
3.
3. And how many saves in total?
21.
21. And I think this is the mark of a guy that maybe was used in more of a stopper role.
Right. He had 48 shutdowns and 7 meltdowns last season.
So, a really good ratio there. And I look forward to seeing what he can do going forward as the Bobcats try and become a more competitive team.
Right. They are the
Defensively,
only team in PBC not to make the playoffs yet, but as stated earlier, they are an expansion team coming into the league in 2035.
and defensively, this team was pretty strong. There was a bad performance from Declue, but Yu was excellent behind the plate. Cariaga was outstanding at third, and Stevens, Dupree, Caterini, Henry, all good seasons. The concern, though, is that some of these players, especially Yu, their offensive production was so low that they weren't even able to acquire positive WARs because of you can't build your career off defense, or at least you can't build your career off defense alone.
Right.
Farm wise, it's an interesting farm. I think it's quite top heavy. You've got two real elite prospects and one
Yes, and
very good one.
that's why they're ranked 13th by as a top one of the top systems is number 13 because they're top heavy.
Indeed. And I think for the Bobcats, that's not necessarily too bad of a thing. They will be acquiring more prospects in the draft coming up after they didn't position that well. If I take a look, they are going to be the 12th overall pick. So they'll be able to acquire some good pieces to add to that. But by having these two big pieces in Josh Wheatley and Juan Tavera, we have a very strong future for the team if those two can deliver on their potential.
Right. Yeah, I would also add Norman Wilkinson to that.
Yeah, he is the third guy I was mentioning is very good. He was the first round pick this year with the draft, and there's a lot of potential there. The only concern for me is that he still needs to really get that kicking, especially now he's 20. But certainly one of the most developed pitchers in that draft, and it'll be fascinating to see where his career leads him.
Right.
Tavera, a good pick. He continues to make steady progress. But for me, Wheatley has been the real standout for this year. A guy that's emerged from absolutely nowhere. At the last scouting report I have before this year was in 2042 in May. Not May, June, and he was rated as a 40 potential. This guy was on the fringes. There's a decent chance he could have been cut for space if there was someone else they wanted on the lineup. But no, they stuck with him. Reached 55 potential in June this year, and then by the end of the year, he's now looking at an 80 potential, and really mashing the ball with that 70 home run potential.
Yeah, that power really boosted. So did his eye. His eye boosted too from 55 to 65, and his contact boosted from 50 to 55.
Yeah. So this guy
Oh,
really
his
has
defense too.
created defense too. He's now a very reasonable defender. That arm is going to make him a cannon in right field.
Yeah, he's going to be somebody to look out for in the future if he reaches that ceiling.
Of course, he is 21 and still has quite a ways to go, but he has already started making good progress. I think overall, this was a 2035 expansion team. They've never made the playoffs, but there's some really strong pieces there and some good young players. So I think they could definitely be set to push for their first playoffs. Maybe next year, but certainly looking forward to 2045.
Right.
Anything else you want to add about the Bobcats?
Just that. No. I think we covered it all.
All right, lovely. So we'll move towards the Iguanas, which will be an interesting look. So the Santo Domingo Iguanas. Before we get into this team, I do want to add this disclaimer. We will not be talking much about their off-season they've made this year. Going forward towards 2044, there's a lot of fascinating moves and some, real interesting developments there. But we will be focusing on that in a future episode when we look at teams' off seasons heading into opening day. So look forward to that. But for this, we'll be primarily looking at the progress they made in 2043, and some of that progress is what's led to this off season coming forward. So looking at 2043, what did you make of the Iguanas, Joseph?
They were horrible it was another horrible season, dead last in just about every offensive category and every pitching category. Just really, really hard to watch.
Yeah, it wasn't pretty. I think I wouldn't necessarily say disappointing. They weren't really attempting to compete, but it's having the pitching to be that bad and the hitting even worse. Very, very disappointing. A young core, though, a young core gradually pushing towards contention. As mentioned, with this offseason, they are looking to compete going into 2044, and this season was strong progress towards that. I think
Yes.
this team, with their one real playoff appearance after Kyle made that legendary burning of the farm season, the farm system, and then finding the playoffs in the Ashes there. Hopefully, we've got some progress towards maybe more long-term sustained future.
I believe that year was the first year that we could trade draft picks, and that was a big contributor to the Iguanas success that season was trading draft picks in their farm to boost their ML roster to make a push.
Right, and that might go some way to explaining why it's taken them so long to get back to that.
Right.
I think with their performance, Alma, he was okay. I didn't mind his performance. It wasn't offensive to me. But in general, no real impressive performances there. It was a pretty disappointing team on the hitting wise. But Hodrick made a solid debut. I think he looks set to push on to much greater things with this lineup. And I was quite impressed by it. Pitching wise,
You weren't impressed with Josh Patterson?
Josh Patrickson, let me just take a look at that again. Bear with me, sorry. Josh Patterson. I mean, he was average, 97 WRC plus. He stacked up some good WAR with, a strong performance on the defensive side of things. But when it came to his performance at the plate, nothing special.
A little bit of a a little bit of a dip from 2042.
For sure. 142 WRC plus in 2042 and 5.9 WAR is definitely a step back. And the Iguanas will very much be hoping that he's able to make a return back to that 2042 performance level in 2044.
I believe he was a first overall pick. No, fifth.
Fifth in 41.
Yes.
On the pitching side of things, Brewer, obviously the standout. This guy pitched very well. 158 ERA plus with 3.70 ERA, 2.62 ERA, and 3.70 FIP. Very, very impressive. And I think probably quite disappointing for him to watch the rotation and lineup collapse around him.
But you have Micah Preston, who should be better than what his stats suggest.
Yeah, I mean he pitched for 200 innings, good innings eater there. But yeah, he's a FIP of 4.73 and ERA at 4.59 isn't really acceptable. And he's now bordering on 27. He's going to need to show what he's capable of, or that big contract that he's got ending in 2052 with this big extension that he's recently signed is going to look quite concerning.
You did have some disappointments in Juan Portillo and John Yon.
Yeah, for sure. Um,
Portillo had a 6.35 FIP and a 7.04 earned run average in 92 innings pitched.
yeah. And I think that's just generally what you could say. We didn't expect much from the Iguanas last year in 2043, but even then they somehow managed to disappoint us.
Right.
Davis was decent out of the pen. Good rookie season, showed a lot of promise. And I think he's going to be hopefully a big contributor to them as they begin to compete. A lefty out of the pen. And yeah, I think a very strong performer for them.
Well, Chris Davis, he could become a starter if his splitter develops.
Indeed. He's certainly sort of bordering on that, and at 23, he still has time.
Right.
Defensively, pretty unspectacular. The team had a gaping hole at shortstop. Patterson made 20 errors and reached a minus 10.9 zone rating. I mentioned I wasn't that keen on his offensive performance. Well, he definitely didn't deserve to be on the team if he was going to perform at shortstop like that. Looking at their farm system, I will caveat this with there are a number of players that were on the Iguanas this year in 2043, but who have now since been traded away. As a result, it has been a little bit more difficult to research their farm and the progress they made. But one thing we can certainly look at is Tim Moran, who was an excellent first-round pick and has made very good progress, along with the 1941 first-rounder Ian Raubenstein, who I believe was traded, amongst many others.
Right. They're currently ranked number 7 in the league in farm systems, and that's mainly due to the fact that Tim Moran is ranked number 3 among all prospects.
Yes. And they were ranked higher. I think they were ranked 3rd at one point. And I think it's this strong farm system that's really given them that launch pad to be able to make this push in the recent off-season. And with the tank over, I look forward to seeing what the Iguanas are able to put forward in the coming seasons. Okay, so moving on to the last team in this division, we're looking at the Washington Nationals. What did you make of this team in this year, Joseph?
I believe they're absolutely dreadful.
I think their pitching was really abysmal. The hitting wasn't great. It was pretty lacking. And I think the only positive here was a high pick awaits for their pain.
Right.
With the bat, the bright spots were Allenby and John. They had respectable seasons, but most of the lineup hit below 100 WRC plus, and runs were very hard to find on this team.
Right.
Is there anything else you want to mention in terms of the hitting core?
I do believe that we could be seeing more of Jim Hedges having more of a role next season. He
Yeah.
did show some signs of incredible offensive production in 2043.
Yep. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think certainly a piece for the future. Although I still have questions about just how good of a catcher he can be at the major league level. That power is his only real tool. He's a middling catcher in terms of defensive ability, and the arm's not amazing. He doesn't have any speed to go for him, and all of his other tools are relatively, in the middle, mediocre. But if he can hit well, if he can replicate that 29 game stretch, it'll be great to see.
Well, I mean, I definitely think he would be an improvement over Jared Carl.
Yes. Carl was I think we look at his offensive production, 18 WRC plus, 18, absolutely abysmal.
And
And
he led the league in 231 strikeouts.
yeah, didn't even improve when he got behind the plate. This guy was a defensive liability as well, and the fact that he ended up with -5 WAR, I think that's almost favourable considering the performance he put forward. A zone rating of 8.8, -8.8 behind the plate, which is incredibly impressive, and -20 framing.
Right.
I don't think this guy deserves to see a major league roster again, if he's going to put a performance like that together. On the rotation, Kreider and Ramirez did a good job. They ate a considerable chunk of innings, but even then, not to great effect. And the rest of the rotation, I mean, it was non-existent. There was no chance there.
Yeah, it's a bad rotation. They're all really old.
Yeah, Guy retired after the season. Guy being a stalwart on the Giants for a few years in the pen, having his one real good season with them in 2037 with an ERA of 3.49 that year. But ever since then, it's been pretty disappointing.
Right.
The pen was not major league caliber. It will be, I think it's going to live long in the nightmares of any Washington fans and the GM there. I think most fans probably would have turned off the TV the moment it came to someone to come out of the pen. There's very little hope there. And as I think you alluded to earlier, defensively they were a liability as well across the board. Alacon was also atrocious in left field, and Parsons was the only real guy that could hold his own in the field.
And as we talked about earlier, Parsons was came to Washington in a trade with Texas for J.J. Carlson and a fifth-round pick that became Tim Jowers.
Yes, so we had a few trades with the Nationals, and I think that trade was certainly big for shoring up that hole. But I think there's going to be a lot more needed to shore up the defensive holes in that lineup.
Well, they did sign Joe Carter to a 3-year deal before the season started, and then traded him away at the trade deadline to Monterey for a 2044 second-round pick and 3 minor league pitchers who are all young and would help this aging pitching staff.
Sure. And I think being able to identify a guy like that they could sign and then flip at the deadline, very smart and very shrewd at dealing by the GM.
Yes.
Now, moving to their farm system, we can now start to talk about them positively, as it's a very healthy system.
Yes, I believe that they are ranked. They are ranked number 9th in the league.
Yeah, Teakin is obviously the big standout. He's a 17-year-old, which is, maybe a bit of a concern, but he already has well-developed power at 70 and 55 gap power, 45 contact, 45 eye. This is a guy that's already pushing his way towards the major leagues at a very young age, and was the 4th overall pick of the 2043 draft. He's had an excellent year, and I think the Nationals may have to speed up their timeline if he continues to develop this fast.
Right. And you could be seeing some of these younger pitchers in the majors next season.
Yeah, Abels is their number 1 prospect on their team, ranked 16 in the entire area. This guy has got 4 good pitches, including an elite cutter. and is well developed. His control is fully developed at 60, movement at 65, and it will really just be a case about pushing that change up. And once that's happened, I think he'll be fully ready for a major league debut.
Yes, and I also think we'll be seeing some of Joe Bourne's
Yeah,
and Joe Crotchet in 2044. And we should be seeing a little bit of Louis Gaetan.
for sure.
But the big guy that's coming up next season, I believe, is Luis Riviera.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
this is another real strong power bat at the corner outfields. He's probably going to play it right, but a very strong player. Uh, spent 2043 in AAA, and I suspect, considering the performance of that hitting core, will likely find himself on the major league roster going into next year.
and he's a capable defender.
Indeed, something that is sorely missing on this side.
Right.
Perhaps, perhaps someone to go along with Joe Carter.
Or Parsons.
Parsons, that was it. Wrong name, sorry. Is there anyone else you'd like to talk about in Washington?
No, I'm just I'd like to see what Nick can do with this team. They have a history of being rather competitive team. After William left, they kind of went into a state of disarray.
Yeah, I think this was definitely a season to forget, but the future looks bright. I think also they have a lot of money on the left on the table. Their budget is pretty, it's not great at the moment, but their payroll is very low, and as they begin to sign some free agents, they will hopefully increase that fan interest and be ready to start making a push.
Absolutely.
All right, so that sums up the NL East. Overall, what have you made of the division?
Overall, I think it's a pretty top heavy division. I mean, you got the three big players there, then you got the three mediocre players, and you got the two horrible teams right there at the bottom with Washington and Santo Domingo. So going into 2044, it's going to be interesting to see uh, what changes.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and I think seeing which teams move up and down that division will be very interesting. With the Bobcats, Iguanas, and Nationals all looking to improve. If the Mets spend, we could see, a very interesting division. With the Phillies, Pirates, and Reds all committed to success and wanting nothing else going forward. All right. Well, thank you for listening to part 3 of our 2043 review. Um, the next part 4, we will be looking at the last division in the National League, and we will also likely be taking a slightly closer look at playoffs, and then just summing up in general the 2043 season and how we felt the season ranked in terms of excitement and enjoyment. We look forward to seeing you next time, and anything else you'd like to say to finish out, Joseph?
Uh, no, I'm just looking forward to more podcast dealing with talking about PBC, talking about the draft, talking about preseason predictions. Just about any kind of baseball themed podcast around PBC just sounds really intriguing at the moment.
All right. Well, we'll finish the podcast episode here, and we'll see you next time. Bye.